Good evening, everyone. Welcome to ACMI, and thank you for coming along to our event this evening, Baby Steps in Conversation with Bennett Foddy. My name is Ari. I'm a programmer here at ACMI. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that tonight's event takes place on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. So this evening's event, I'm really excited for it. I'm sure you all are too. I'm going to be a little bit fanboyish, but like throughout it, I have to be honest. Because we're getting to talk to like an icon of video game development, like from Australia, but also internationally. So please put your hands together for tonight's guest, Bennett Foddy. I mean, in case you can't tell how fanboyish I'm going to be, I already felt it in that intro. So Bennett Foddy is an independent game designer, born in Melbourne and currently based in New York. He's best known for his browser game QWOP, his 2017 title Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, which is included in the permanent collection of New York's Museum of Modern Art, and for his contribution to the 2025 PC and PlayStation title Baby Steps. So tonight, look, you're going to hear us have a chat right throughout Bennett's career, but you're also going to have an opportunity to ask some questions yourself so a little bit later in the event. If you would like to ask questions, what we ask is that you take a scan of the QR code, and that will lead you to our app Slido. And you can submit questions at any time throughout the talk, or also at the end of the talk when we get to the Q&A section. So, Bennett, it's so great to have you back here in Australia.
And thanks for having me.
How was your holiday period?
It's been great to be back. Yeah, it's been a few years since I've been back in Melbourne. Just not much has changed except everybody's extended their house at the back. But no, it's really great to be out here and get a little bit of sunshine.
That's great. Yeah. Well, look, what I'd like to do is let's take a little bit of a journey back, and we'd like to start at the beginning. Studying at university, your initial experience was in philosophy as opposed to game design. So can you tell us about this time and what attracted you to game design as a pursuit and some of your earliest experiments as a developer?
Yeah, my undergraduate degree at Melbourne Uni was philosophy and physics, and I was kind of funneling my way into a career in academic philosophy and working on my PhD here in Melbourne, and kind of a little bit fiddling at other things that were a little bit more creative on the side. So I was in a band for a little while, a local band called Cut Copy.
Mm-hmm. Sure, a lot of the audience will have fun Cut Copy memories.
Yeah, they're still playing. And then for a little while, to make money on the side, I was making TV commercials for mobile phone ringtones back in the flip phone days, just kind of like really looking for some sort of outlet.
Yep.
But I was also getting into, I've been a kind of lifelong video game fan. And so I was getting into this thing that was happening, which is that there were these games starting to appear that had been made by very small teams. I think a lot of them were coming out of Japan, kind of Cave Story, La Mulana, that sort of thing, and starting to get press on the video game websites that I was reading at the time. And I was getting interested in that. And I think what I didn't know, I don't think what anybody really knew, is that around that time, sort of 2005, 2006, we were right on the cusp of probably the biggest explosion in the numbers of video game developers since the beginning of the 80s, and it was really like we were going to go from especially independent or sort of solo game developers being like 5% of the people who go to GDC, the big conference in San Francisco, to being more than 50%. So what that represents is just this giant explosion of creativity and of industry was about to happen through the appearance of Flash, which people are able to play games in their browsers, and of course mobile phones were about to happen as well. I didn't know any of that, but I did know that suddenly it started to seem like there were like tutorials for how to make a little game yourself in Flash. And I started kind of pottering around with that. And it suddenly seemed like it had gotten easy enough and to where it was doable. And this is the first game that I made in Flash, and it's called Too Many Ninjas. A very, very simple rudimentary thing, as you can see. But
there were so many ninjas.
There were so many ninjas, But I coded that up as I was kind of teaching myself to do programming, and I posted it on a forum that I had been kind of lurking on, the TIG Source forums. And the first comment under it was like a really encouraging note from Derek Yu, who, of course, went on later to make Spelunky and UFO 50 is this extremely influential game designer. But there was this kind of community of people who were, I think, also sensing that something was in the water, that something was about to happen. And just from that moment of kind of just having that little bit of encouragement, I kind of was hooked. And I kept on doing it when I probably should have been doing other things that I was employed to do or that I was supposed to be doing. I was kind of like just, kind of squeezing little bits of game experimentation in there. Yeah, so that's sort of that's the story of how it started.
Well, it's funny because like I think a lot of people playing your games would have that same experience doing it while they should have been doing other things.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And look, it's interesting because like throughout the years with the games that you've released, I think we've seen sort of each time a little bit of an evolution of maybe some of the themes and some of the design structures and things that we'd seen come before. Mm-hmm. So, look, one of your earlier works, QWOP, saw it becoming like a kind of this international viral hit. I know myself at that time, I was saying to Bennett a little earlier, I was a high school teacher and like literally every kid in this 1,000-school-leaving high school was playing QWOP constantly in the back of the room and pretending that they weren't. So in QWOP, you play as a runner trying to win a 100-meter dash, with the player controlling the leg joints, or not controlling the leg joints as the case may be, a feat that sounds easier than it is. So can you talk through your time discovering and designing this, and why you think it resonated so much with players?
Sure. I mean, it wasn't a very long time. I mean, I had the basic gameplay for this up in a couple days, and then basically the whole thing was finished in a week. It's a very small game, and it's very, very, the whole thing, including all the artwork and music, compresses down to about 100 kilobytes. Really, yep. It's not a very big game. But, I guess the way I think about it in hindsight is, games, when you're making games most of the time, what happens is you come up with an idea, you have a formulation in mind, we know exactly what it's going to be like to play it, give or take. And maybe you have to kind of figure some things out along the way, but you're making it exist as you imagined it. But then every now and again, there's a game that is kind of discovered more than it's made. So it's as though you went wandering in the wilderness and you just came upon it. And in this case, I was trying to make something that was a lot more like a real walking simulator, where you'd be able to actually make the guy run like in a compelling, realistic way. And it was the very, very first thing that I tried. Just was funny, and it was like, okay, actually I don't have to do the thing, which I was not anywhere near qualified or able to do, the hard thing with all the maths and the physical understanding and everything that I would have needed to make a realistic running game. I couldn't have done that, but it was just very clear, just the slapstick comedy of it was something. And then I started showing it to people, and it was just like, you're done. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm done. I threw it up online, and it made a little bit of a splash. There was some writing about it, but it didn't blow up for another year and a half.
Yep. And so, I mean, I guess what made it blow up? Was there a particular internet point that's...
So, I mean, I think about that also in similar terms, right? So, I think I can tell you the story of exactly what happened, and I have a theory as to the why, right? So what actually happened was around this same period of time, something was happening which was called YouTube, started to exist, and people were trying to figure out what should culture look like on YouTube. And one of the things that we eventually settled on is it should look like somebody's playing a video game and talking about it and reacting to it while they're doing it. In 2010, around Christmas time, there was a video by Moist Critical. He's still around today. His style has changed, and he's just playing the game and talking about it in a silly voice. that started to kind of pick up in interest. And then at that time on YouTube as well, the other thing that people were doing was these shows where they would like aggregate kind of weird YouTube. And something about QWOP, when people see it, it's like it looks like it's from an internet from another planet, right?
Totally.
It doesn't fit with how video games are supposed to look or how they're supposed to play. And so it was good fodder for those sorts of videos too, that kind of content. And so I think there was a thing called Less Than Threes, Ray William Johnson's show.
Yeah.
And he was making fun of the game, right?
Yep.
And that was somehow the thing that kind of, suddenly there's like tens of millions of people playing the game. My server's on fire. I had like 48 hours to learn how to install a new web server that could actually handle the pressure of it. And yeah, I mean, from that point forward, it started to kind of go out everywhere, right? Like everybody was playing it. But I do think, as for the why, when people come to play QWOP, regardless of how they got there, if somebody told them or if they saw it on a video or something like that, it feels like they found something in a weird place.
Yep.
Because the website's bad and the game's ugly and it doesn't play how a video game's meant to play, and you feel like you found something, right? And I think that's that sense of discovery, which you still probably get it if you find it today. I would see people all the time be like, oh my God, I found the strangest thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd show their friend, they'd be like, oh yeah, we've been playing that in computer lab for the last 3, how did you not get the memo that this was a thing? It feels like nobody knows about it, I think. And once I realized that, I resisted making it better. Which is be a normal thing to do. When you're making Flash games, one of the nice things about it is you can just change it. If it's not working or if there's a bug, whatever, you can improve it. But I kind of just held back and tried to keep it like this weird little artifact. And I do actually think that that's something that probably has only gotten stronger over the years. So we've been through the Facebook era and the Twitter era and all of these kind of things which consolidated all of the web traffic down to like 3 websites. Mm-hmm. And we're not used to going to a self-hosted website anymore. It does sometimes happen, but it's really not where most of the traffic is. And so it feels like you've gone to something that Google doesn't want you to know about because it doesn't really,
That sense of discovery.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing. That's the thing that really resonated.
I want to pick up on a couple of things you were just talking about, and it's particularly about that thing that looks almost not quite right. I mean, I guess what we might call the uncanny valley. Mm-hmm. I mean, do you think that we as humans have, I guess, a little bit of an innate attraction to something in the uncanny valley as opposed to being turned off by it not being quite right?
Sometimes, yeah. I know. I do think that there is a thing that a person's brain does if something's just a little bit skew-whiff.
Yeah.
Which is just their brain's trying to correct it in some way. Is just doesn't you? I'm not kind of uncomfortable, and I'm not going to be comfortable until somehow it's set right. Maybe that's a thing that drives people to play a game, and maybe then that's sort of part of the core experience of playing a game. Is you're sort of trying to make sense of something that is kind of out of whack or is not quite working, especially in the case of QWOP.
Yep.
I think one of the things that was surprising about it, I mean, I could see the comedy in it, right? And I could understand it, and it was funny to me as well. What I didn't anticipate is how addicted people would get to it. So I would hear from people. I was talking to Jake Rodkin and Sean Vanneman, who went on to make Firewatch and are now at Valve. At the time, they were supposed to be journalistically covering a big BlizzCon conference or something like that, and instead they got stuck in their hotel room just playing QWOP for 48 hours. They just couldn't stop. Fear
and loathing in QWOP, eh?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think there's something about that because there's not much to it, right? It's just this little sliver of an experience. But it's sort of like it's you want to scratch the itch.
Totally, and I think there are particular design choices that you've made there and stuff that you're right, like become really attractive as a player.
Yeah.
Like, for example, that short play experience, but also it's that quick reset.
Yes.
And it becomes that kind of just one more go, like mentality, you know, sitting up at 3 a.m. and it's like, you know what, just one more go and this is the time that I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be I guess some of my early work has really got a real commitment to the quick reset. Where things start to go wrong, you just immediately back to starting again.
Yep.
And then I guess I kind of moved away from that as time went on.
I think the other thing I wanted to pick up on was your talk about the mechanics and stuff being just a little bit not quite right or so.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess a term that we would usually use for that is jank.
Yep.
So could you talk to us a little bit about jank and how important that might be in your design? I guess a design approach.
Yeah, I mean, it's an aesthetic. There's So what is jank? It's not so easy to say,
No.
right? You know, jank is something that maybe doesn't look quite realistic, but looks like it's trying to be realistic, or it doesn't behave quite as you expect. It's something that, you know, if we're playing a skateboarding game and the skateboard suddenly glitches through a tree and flies off to outer space, it might be funny, it might be appreciated, but it's not what you expect a skateboard to do, and so we call that jank. Leaving jank in is the aesthetic, right? So my approach even since then is to really sweat some of the details and leave some of the things really janky. I guess because it's funny to me.
Yeah.
But maybe back in 2008 when I made QWOP, it was also because I didn't know how to do the polish thing. But it's been important to me for most of my career to move fast, right? Because I always feel like the sort of like the life of an idea is sort of like constantly evaporating. It's constantly getting away. You're trying to freeze it in amber to turn it into a video game. And I think even on our most recent game, Baby Steps, which we worked on probably for 6 years in the end, I think we were still doing that in there. And that's why jank has remained in there. It's like to say, I could fix this, but it would ruin it. I think that's the kind of the aesthetic that I'm doing. Yeah.
So there's some other things I'd like to pick up while we're talking specifically about design choices, you know, and design approach to your games. And many of the games you've made over the years are underpinned, I guess, by a pretty specific philosophy and a creative approach. So difficulty, failure, frustration, they play a major part in your work. Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of the games that I came up with, I get a certain number of emails that are like this. And I think some of them are meant sincerely and some of them are meant in good fun, and I always choose to take them in good fun. So this person is either angry or they are playing it being angry.
Yeah.
But angry is like a thing that a video game or, you know, indeed a piece of productivity software can make you feel.
Yep.
And video games are really good at making you feel that way. And I think part of that is just historical, right? Like looking back to the beginning, partly because people didn't know better, partly because they were trying to make people play the games more to put coins into the arcade machines. Or kind of extend the rental period of a console game or something like that. We tended to make them hard, right? That we tended to make them require repetition, and it's just inherently it's a source of frustration whenever you're sent back and you have to repeat something. That's a thing that you would do if you were trying to annoy somebody. So games are really good at being annoying, and that's just a thing they do well in the way that food is good at being tasty, right? Every creative medium has its kind of inherent natural gifts, and being annoying is a thing that video games have, and so I think somewhere along the way, it might have been in reflecting on QWOP, which I didn't really intend to be considered to be hard, right? But I started to see how people were reacting to it, and you know, what it was like when somebody was really kind of striving to beat QWOP, and I liked it. I mean, there was something that I liked about that. I think I saw that people were frustrated. They were deeming it to be the world's most difficult game, which is absurd to me, but like that's the way that they wanted to talk about it. And I started to think, well, there's enjoyment in this. They're not saying it's the world's most difficult game as in nobody should play this. Like, come and play this super annoying game. Is that basically the idea, right?
And then laugh at your friends while they fail.
Right. And so I think part of it is that art in general, we like that it provokes different kinds of experiences. If you're into horror movies, they scare you, and we don't want to feel scared all the time, but we like to feel scared sometimes, kind of dip into the full range of different feelings. And so this is just a thing that games can do. And I guess the background which I was making these games against, especially when I got started, was through like 2000 to 2010, 2012-ish. There was this wave of making games kind of easier and easier to play for a broader and broader audience, easier to understand, less annoying, basically. There's more tutorials, there was more difficulty settings, there's more quick save and reload, right? Like those were all kind of waves of like sanding off the edges. So for indies, we're always working in opposition to the predominant trend. So it was a thing that I could do to kind of like offer a different experience. And then of course about 2009 to 2012, we see the enormous impact at the AAA level of Demon's Souls, Dark Souls. And now we're in a zone where difficulty is kind of everywhere and frustration is everywhere. So it's kind of proliferated.
I think one of the other things I'd like to look at is your games. You almost like you as a developer almost feel like a character that you're interacting with, whether that's through the difficulty spikes, whether that's through things a little bit more on the surface, like we'll look at with your next game. But that kind of seems in opposition, I guess, to general design approach, which is just kind of to hide the development, to hide the mechanics, and so it becomes a little bit more seamless.
Yes.
And I think that's interesting because it kind of almost creates this parasocial relationship between player and yourself as the developer.
Right, yeah. I think that's something that we've been fighting against in games since the 80s. There was a industrial moment during the kind of heyday of the golden era of arcade machines, where there were so few designers and programmers around that they were trying to kind of headhunt them and really kind of keep them like locked in a room and like little kind of trolls in a coal mine or something like that, and they weren't allowed to be credited. If they were interviewed, they weren't allowed to give their real names. There's a lot that we don't know about the games from that period because so many of the people had to work in that sort of way, and it was just for industrial advantage of the companies making the games, right? The capital holders, and but it became part of the culture in a certain way, and I think anonymity became part of the culture, partly because anonymity was part of the internet culture where this kind of grassroots thing I'm talking about with the Flash games and the kind of influx of the early indie game developers were coming up in a period where, of course, I'm interacting with people on weird forums. It's all very anonymous. Everybody's got a pseudonym. And we're also now dabbling in a field where I'm used to all my favorite games having like all the developers have a pseudonym at the end and not have their real name, right? And I started to feel like I wanted to know more about the people who were making them. Because what I love about the games that were starting to bubble up was they were personal, right? Like some of them were actually about personal experiences or autobiographical, but even the ones that weren't were expressing something of the person's personality who had made the game. And I wanted to know who they were, and I wanted to be able to go and see what else they'd worked on and kind of follow through their oeuvre, and it was hard to do. And I started to started to bother me, I guess. Yeah.
I think that's a perfect time for us to maybe stick forward and have a little bit of a look at your next game. Well, maybe not your next game, but the next game that we're going to talk about.
Fast forward through the
Yeah, we'll
flashing,
stick QWOP in.
yeah.
Why did I make this? This horrible hike up an impossible mountain. I could have made something you would have liked. A game that was empowering, that would save your progress and inch you steadily forward. Since success is delicious, that would have been wise. Instead, I must confess this isn't nice. It tastes of bitterness. It's capricious. It sets setbacks for the ambitious. It lacks lenience. It's bracing, inhumane. But not everyone's the same. I created this game for a certain kind of person. To hurt them.
So look, maybe your most well-known work is Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy. Another work that went really viral. In this, your philosophical ideas, I guess, are presented more expressly within the game's audio design and featuring yourself outlining the philosophy behind its intentionally frustrating design. So tell us about your creative and design process at this time, the intentions and decisions behind the gameplay loop.
Yeah, so I mean, I had this particular type of thing going on where I wanted to make something that was personal to me and where people couldn't mistake that there was a person behind it, and that person had a particular point of view. And I had just played my mentee and student Nina Freeman's game Sybil, which is one of the great indie,
Beautiful.
sort of autobiographical games, and Davey Reedon's The Beginner's Guide, which is also like a kind of like an inward-looking piece. And I was really inspired by the kind of openness that they had, the kind of that they were willing to kind of sort of stick their necks out and expose themselves. And I wanted players to understand that I was in there and to kind of make contact with them. And in order to do that, I started to think about who was playing the game. What kind of person would play something that, I knew I was making something that was like to my own peculiar taste. It was going to be very frustrating. It was going to be very annoying and cruel, which is what I like when I'm playing a game, right? But anybody who got like further and further in the game, if they got far enough along, that we would have something in common, and that is the kind of the contact that we can make between designers and players, between artists and audiences. And so this game that was like an idea from the jump. I wanted to I wanted to be seen. And I wanted to be able to see the players as well. So as you progress through Getting Over It, it goes from a kind of what starts as a sort of a dispassionate intellectual commentary on the nature of asset flips, games that are made out of kind of like free assets. And on the nature of commercialism, which is something that I wanted players to kind of step out of this frame of seeing games as being like big studio commercial products and to start thinking about them as being a kind of a personal product. It follows a kind of an arc toward being a sort of an intimate letter of understanding between somebody who I can assume gets me by the end of the game, and that was the kind of the idea, the impetus behind it, and the sort of driving force.
Yeah.
But even the gameplay itself is like, that's something that is as I call out right at the beginning of the game. That's sort of like itself a sort of a remaindered thing from this game by Jazuo, Sexy Hiking, which was one of the ones that I was interested in when I was like just getting interested in these sorts of games. And Jazuo has a similar approach. It's very, very, you can't mistake that there's a person at work in his games, and that very eccentric, idiosyncratic person that makes it easier to really to make contact. And so I really wanted to kind of explore that space.
And I guess that that interaction between yourself as developer and the players is kind of implemented in a pretty unique way in getting over it, which many people might not even realize or ever see.
Yeah. So you get to the end of getting over it. It offers you do you want the reward? And you have to promise that you're not streaming or anything like that. That caused some problems. And if you take the reward, it takes you to a live chat room, which is currently down, right, because of sadly. But for years, actually, this was up. But when I launched the game, I actually had it set up so that when somebody went into the chat room, it would send an email to my phone, and my phone would make a sound, and I would run over to the computer and I would log in, and I would congratulate the person who So really, I didn't think many people would buy this game, and I really didn't think many people would finish it, and so I thought this will be totally fine. This is going to be something that's completely sustainable for me, for the rest of my life. And in the end, I couldn't maintain it, but it was actually really lovely because they get there, kind of the climax of the narration in that game is a feeling of closeness, I think, to the author, and then to have the author come in and be like, "Congrats, you've done something very hard and good job." As you can see, some of them didn't believe it was me. That's fair enough. Probably if it happened now, they'd assume it was an AI trained on me. But I'd have to kind of convince them that it was me. Sometimes they were never convinced. But they were all so sweet and respectful, and because of just how the game was kind of functioning for them. If they were going to be kind of angry or dismissive or anything like that, they wouldn't have finished, right? So everybody who kind of got in there was like, it meant something to them that I was there and talked to them. That was.
Look at this! It's such a unique reward, to be able to talk with the creator of something that, particularly something as challenging that requires as much resilience to be able to get to the end.
Yes.
So it again creates these I guess ever increasing levels of relationship between yourself as a developer and between players.
Yes.
Even if that's a relationship where you never speak, or it's completely removed by the processes of what it is.
Exactly, and I think that's one big pillar of what's going on in that game, and the other one is, I think a lot of games are about metacognition, thinking about how you're thinking, right? When you're playing a game, you're kind of winning or you're losing, and you are kind of start wondering about, what am I doing that's working for me here, and what am I doing that's not working, and then you start to notice how you're developing your skills or your theories of strategy and all of that stuff. So the thing that games do, I think, across the board is metacognition. But what I was interested in with this game was turning that kind of inward eye on the question of why you're playing. Why are you playing this, right? Like I said in the trailer, why did I make this? But sort of, why are you playing this? Why are you still playing, even though you just lost, 4 hours of progress and you fell to the bottom?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I got interested in that myself when I was playing games, right? What is it that's driving me to continue? And you can say, well, they're addictive, or they're fun, or there's story, I'm curious, I'm exploring. There's lots of reasons, but eventually they tend to fall away and you find yourself still doing it. And the thing that I'm really, really interested in, I've been interested in ever since this point, is the question of why do I like this, right? What this thing that I'm supposed to dislike, being frustrated, being set back, being angry, being annoyed, how is that working for me as an element of enjoyment or of fun, or at least why am I like a moth to a flame? Why am I returning to it over and over again? And to me, that was something that I really explored in this game and have continued being interested in subsequently.
I think the other thing that's really interesting about getting over it is, I guess, at the particular point that it came along the timeline.
Yep.
And we've seen a real rise in, I guess, a differentiation in the way that a lot of people will interact with games. Like, a lot of people who interact with games aren't actually players now. And this is, I guess, through the rise of the streamer.
Yep.
So can you talk to me a little bit about like what it's like to be this kind of one step removed, and like how you feel people will gain the kind of things, or at least access the kind of things you're talking about when they're watching someone else play this game and react?
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I was kind of hostile to actually when I was making Getting Over It. And it comes across, I think, in the script a little bit, because I was trying to reach out to somebody who was playing the game. Right, I'm trying to say, like, let's have a shared experience. Let's go deep on it, and let's be in the same place, and let's be in contact. And sure enough, it's the perfect vehicle in a way for this other thing that was happening that had grown out of Let's Plays on YouTube to now being this kind of live thing on Twitch, where tens of millions of people are watching at any given time. What are effectively kind of reaction videos? They're like Japanese game shows of the 90s. You've got like a person's face, usually a very good looking, charismatic person, is playing a game, and then they're having a reaction. And then it's kind of comforting, I guess. We kind of watch them have a reaction, and then we have a kind of like a ghost of that reaction ourselves. I was so against that, right? Because it was felt so opposite. The thing that I was trying to provoke, but the game works really well for them, because what streaming is it's a performance, right?
100%.
It's a performance art, and like many kind of dramatic forms, like theater forms and so on, they want something against which to kind of like show emotion, to show a range of like human experience, and to be able to kind of overreact to it. And it was like the perfect thing for them. And I think that it has kind of flourished as a whole genre of game now, is stuff that streamers are able to react to.
Yep.
And I can't, although I was hostile with the thought of it and anticipating it, I was hostile to it while I was making the game. I came to see that there is something beautiful about it. I guess, there's this idea that goes around that the thing about games as a creative form is that they're incomplete, right? They're completed by the way that people play them, by the sort of little subcultures and house rules and all of these different places that they can be appreciated. None of that can really be anticipated, right? And you'd be making a mistake like the arch formalist architects did, in the wave of kind of architectural modernism, where they tried to perfectly control how everybody was going to live in the buildings they were making. And we no longer do buildings that way. But game designers still want to, right? Like, they still want to set up an exact experience and have it be exactly experienced that way. But I was able through this process to recognize that it's just as beautiful, this kind of unintended, this kind of opposite experience that people really wanted to have with my work, as the one that I intended. And both of them exist, right? And then on top of that, there are all these other ways that it was played. And so the idea is that the game is completed by all the different ways that people use it and react to it and play it. So, I came around on that, I think, in the end.
Yeah, and look, I do think this is a really interesting evolution in the way that people are interacting with games. I mean, something that at its core, interactivity is the core of what sets us aside from other screen art forms and other screen mediums. And I think what we're seeing is like a generation or a lot of kids that will interact with lots of different games, but not through playing nowadays.
Right.
Only through watching.
But isn't that interesting? Because it's not what we might have said was a definition of interaction.
Yeah.
We wouldn't normally we would imagine interaction is active, right? It involves
totally.
action, but it doesn't necessarily. And there are interactive ways to sit and watch something.
Yeah.
There's ways for that to be interactive, but the actions are happening in the mental and social space. They're not happening in the between the computer and the person controlling it. So yeah.
And I guess what this comes to then is are we seeing an evolution in the ideas of what community is? Like, press F to interact in chat.
Yeah. You know what it is? It is, I mean, it is the community of so many young people, particularly. We recently had a 9-year-old visiting our house. So some friends came from Barcelona and they brought their 9-year-old. And he's not allowed a lot of screen time. He could play a game. He could watch a TV show. He could watch a movie. He doesn't want to do any of that. He wants to watch Queso play Getting Over It. That's his thing that he wants to do. And that whole cohort is going to be like that. That's going to be the culture. And I think that's cool, Yeah.
Look, let's shift on. I want to talk a little bit about your most recent work, Baby Steps.
Yep.
Before we get into it, let's have a little look.
Nate!
Nate, buddy, family meeting, let's go.
Are you bringing him food again?
Not right now.
Talked about this.
Not right now.
You are
okay?
literally killing him with these pizzas.
You just want to throw him out on the street?
No,
Is that what you
I
want?
know, he's
You
35.
want him to live on the
I
street?
want him to have some kind of discipline.
Discipline.
Nate, if you can hear my voice, I want you to come up here. We're having a family meeting.
What the hell?
Oh, can you not?
It's just I didn't.
Yeah, let's go back in time to when you didn't.
No, I was just trying to catch it with my. Sorry,
With your
just
foot,
using my.
yeah, you tried to catch it.
I saw it was starting to go, and I just tried to.
You just kicked. You thought I'll give it a good kick
No,
to counteract the fall.
Yeah, I was just trying to steady it. I might be over.
Yeah, you might have. You might have oversteadied
Yeah,
it.
no, it was just a little oversteadied.
Well, it's not steady now.
No, well,
See you later.
it's
Wanker.
yeah.
Look, being honest, I loved this game. I have to say, I laughed more than I have in any game in recent memory. So if you haven't played it yet, Baby Steps, the platforms, just go check it out. One of the things I want to talk about with this, though, like Baby Steps is definitely, or at least I feel, the most narrative forward of your games. How did this alter your creative approach to the design of the game? And now that it's been out for a few months, how's it resonated with the player base?
Yeah, the narrative thing is new, and it was something that we kind of came to little by little. We basically, the story of how we got started on this game is that we'd been making a bunch of prototypes in 2019. None of them were really working out, and Gabe proposed to me that he could do with the computer what I was unable to do back in 2008 when I was getting started making QWOP, which was to make a game where you're controlling the feet of the character, except you can actually walk. I said, from experience, I know that was too hard in 2 dimensions, and in 3 dimensions it would be impossible. But sure enough, he did it. He's a much better programmer than me, and we started to kind of experiment with playing it and trying to look at the size that we wanted. We knew pretty early on that the fun stuff was in a big world, right? And then we had to have stuff in the big world. And then naturally you want to start to have like things to discover and things to experience. And so it starts to be, well, there should be characters in this world, right? And you know, you should be able to kind of go and talk to them. And we had that there were characters, and you'd go up and it would be the normal indie games thing. You'd see some text representing them speaking back and forward. But our playtesters, they just wanted out. You know, they wanted they'd walk up, read a little bit of text, and then try to walk away. It's like, well, plus writing is awful. Writing is the worst thing. And then we tried kind of scripting some voice and recording the voice. Same problem, right? We tried then having the characters follow you around, so you couldn't try to escape the cutscene. They'd be like, you know, yeah, just everything was a walk and talk. That presents its own problems. But we were starting to feel like there was sort of energy in the recording sessions when we were sort of improvising, when we were just messing around, that people did enjoy listening to, and that people didn't want to kind of jump out of, and so sort of just committed to it. But I think that it fits with this sort of aesthetic that I hope is kind of in my work since QWOP, and is that we were sort of interested in as a group, I think, as well, which was finding stuff again rather than really super controlling it. And it's all the way through this game. The level design started with a fractal mountain that was randomly generated, and kind of looking for interesting things in there, sort of trying to find them rather than to try to control it too much. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, the narrative was kind of flowing from that as well. It's like, yeah, we do these scenes, we just get into the booth and start kind of riffing, sort of see what's funny. And then if we edit it down, I'd hop in the mocap suit and do the actions. And if it a whole thing could be turned around really, really fast in a janky way, like giving into this kind of jank. As long as we let it be janky, we could have it be fast. And there was a sense of it being alive and of being discovered that was giving it humor in our own ears, right? And so that just became a thing. In the end, there's like 108 cutscenes in this game. You know, we really, really did too many for an indie game. But yes, no, it crept in as it was just sort of fitting aesthetically with the kind of aesthetic goals and the level design and everything else. So yeah, I mean, it was something that we kind of came to sideways.
And look, I think one of the other really lovely things is that the voiceovers, like the acting in there, is primarily from like Australian voices.
Yeah, well, voices, it's me.
Look, and it's just something that we don't get the opportunity to hear very often, like honestly, if at all. And there was something really, I guess, like so comforting to be able to hear my own voice and see that reflected within a game. Like, how has the reception to that been, I guess, worldwide?
You know, it's hard for me to tell exactly how people are reacting to that, but I can say that I do a little bit of accents. You can hear my real Australian accent is not very authentic or Australian anymore. So I'm kind of like making it more Australian. I'm trying to channel a PE teacher from my high school. But it is a choice to make all the characters, most of the characters. Of course, Gabe plays Nate, the main character. But it's a choice to make them just be Australian. That is, I think, yeah, you don't hear it very much. Yeah. There are some notable examples. There's a weird Australian in Final Fantasy 13 that we do crop up here and there. Yeah.
It's not just the Australian thing. You know what it is? It's I think the word that probably best describes it is ochre.
Yes.
Like everything that you hear there is very ochre, and
so to me that's funny. It's a funny thing. When I was teaching at NYU, and I would have like a classroom full of American students, I started to get, you get a little annoyed living in the USA. People are very used to hearing American accents there. And Australian accents sometimes, I mean, Bluey has made this easier, but sometimes throw people for a loop. And I would say something that seemed very normal to me, and just see the whole class kind of looking at me blankly. And I would get a little bit, more perverse about it. I'd start to use slang they couldn't possibly know, stuff that had died out in the 70s, and just like, pick it up from context, do what I have to do living here. And so I was feeling a little bit of that doing this stuff, and it was hilarious to me how Gabe would react if I said something that he didn't know. So like there's a scene in this game where one of my characters, Jim, says, "I've had it up to Pussy's bow." And Gabe was like, the take we have is the first time I've said it. So I was holding it back for one of the takes. Like I hadn't said it in any of our previous attempts. And he's actually just stuck for a second. And then he goes, "I'm stunned." And he sounds stunned because he is stunned. It says now on the subtitles, actor is actually stunned.
I love it. Well, look, let's take a little bit of a look behind the scenes at some of this voice recording.
All right, so let me just say before you play this.
Contexts, please.
I picked this out because I want to say, so we were in love with the sense of liveness that we get from this. I'm aware, and everybody should be aware that I'm aware that we're not good actors. We're especially we're not professional voice actors, and it's in spite of that I think it works. But what I've given you is an outtake from when we were doing one of the few cutscenes that has somebody else. We've got Frank Lance, who is a game designer who made Universal Paperclips. Yep. Recently made QWOP. And we have him playing Nate's dad. Now, Frank is a real actor, and he has been in a movie and everything. And the difference between us is a little bit throwing Gabe under the bus, but take a listen.
Yeah.
You want to do a little warm up? You want to do zip zap zap?
Sure. Yeah. What to do today at a minute or two to do, a thing distinctly hard to say and harder still to do, but a quarter to two, there'll be to do, the dragon will come when he hears the drum at a quarter or two to do today, at a quarter or two to two.
Yeah, perfect. That was it.
Toy boat. You do that one? Let's hear you do
Toy
that one.
boat, toy boat.
Excuse me? Let's try it again.
Toy boat.
Yeah, so it does it here's the thing. I mean, I think if you're looking for kind of liveness, skill is not the main thing. Of course, it was lovely to work with Frank. We got all of those phone call cutscenes we got in one take with him. But yeah, no, I think we were just kind of feeling our way and letting it be alive.
Amazing. Look, again, if you haven't had the chance to pick up Baby Steps yet, please do. It's worth every dollar you pay for it. Look, we're almost going to hand over the questions and stuff, but I do have one more little thing. So we might have a lot of aspiring game designers out there in the audience. So I guess, given the success of your career, what advice do you have for the game designers of the future?
I think the thing that I always would tell my students that was very, very rarely taken up is you have to play video games. Of course, you have to be drawing. You have to be drawing inspiration from lots of things, and it's no good if you're only playing video games. You should have a whole rich life and a personality and everything. But I met so many. The thing about games that makes them different from other creative arts is it's tough to play a game. It takes a lot of effort. If you get a movie going, you have to bring your brain. You have to kind of engage with it, especially if it's kind of more of an art film. But it's just going to go, right? And if you kind of lost attention for a second, you can kind of come back in. Yep. Reading a book, it's sort of effortly, but not really. You can get really gripped into them. But just even to get a game running is actually a big technical pain. And then to play it takes so much longer, and it takes so much, awakeness and all of this stuff.
It's commitment.
Yeah. And so it's natural that everybody winds up, most of the students that I had over the years would just play one game, or they'd play no games. And I keep meeting indie game developers who say, my favorite game is making games. Or they say, I don't have time to play games because, I'm my own boss, and, I've got a deadline and I'm stressed out and I'm crunching. I just think it's just a really, really important part of the practice. There's more games now. They're more accessible than they ever have been in the past. You can, on Steam, there's probably like 1 million games on there, and you can download them and refund them after 2 hours. A little taste. That's it's one of the great things. I think that's one of the great things that's out there at the moment, is the fact that you can do that. And
you can have a pile of shame.
yes, you can have a giant pile of unplayed games. No, but that's the essence of it. I think that we've lived through this kind of really interesting time where the range of designs and there's just been this giant proliferation of what games are like and what they do and how they're played and what they're used for. And it's so hard to stay ahead of that culture because it's moving so fast. It's constantly like you blink and things have just changed massively. So yeah, anybody who's getting started, I think that would be the main one. Play some games.
Well, Ben, it's been so great to chat with you, but I think it's time that we hand over to the audience. I did see, like, on my little thing that there's quite a few already in there. Was it on purpose that you allowed persistent players to break past the first and second demo walls in the Baby Steps demo? Was there ever a way past the third?
It was on purpose. Yeah.
It wasn't on purpose?
No, it was.
Oh, it was?
It was on purpose. Yeah. So when you get to the end of the demo for Baby Steps is just the first chapter. So if you bomb through it, it's over in 5 minutes. There's actually quite a lot in that chapter to explore and find out.
Mm-hmm.
We set up some ways that the persistent player would be able to get around those little blocks and see a little bit more. Not too much more. Eventually, the actual content wasn't there, but we allowed that amount of content to be in there. It's an interesting question because making Baby Steps was a balancing act between letting stuff that had come there randomly continue to be there,
Mm-hmm.
putting stuff in that would show the designer's hand, and then also putting stuff in that would look like it was there by accident, that was secretly designed, and all three of those flavors I think are important and do different things in that game. But yeah, this is an example where we did a little bit of creative bullshit and make it look like you're doing something illegal, that you've found something.
Love it.
Discovery is like that, right? It's go back to QWOP, feeling like you found an illegal website.
Yep.
That's the feeling that we're trying to give.
And I think that talks to just like one of the joyous parts about games and the unique thing about games that I guess no other medium can give us, which is, the ability to make us feel like we're stronger than the world, or that we've gotten somewhere that we shouldn't be, or it's that sense of discovery and all of that. But again, that reflects on yourself as a person, not just the character that you're playing.
Yeah, I'd been talking to a friend while we were working on this stuff, who was playing Elden Ring.
Yeah.
And he kind of like stood on a tree that you weren't meant to be able to stand on, kind of glitched his way over to a cliff, and then he kind of shimmied along the cliff you weren't meant to be able to shimmy on, just to see what was there, right? And he got around the corner, go around another little kind of ledge, and then there's a treasure chest with like a prize in it. And he said at that moment, when he got the prize, it kind of killed his enjoyment of the game, right? So it's a fine line, right? At some level, you want to reward player exploration and inquisitiveness. There's got to be something for them sometimes, but you also have to just allow some of the stuff not to be finished. Some of the stuff is finished by the fact that they got there at all. That they found a glitch, that they got outside of the play field. There's that beautiful movie that the grannies made with Marie Fulston about breaking outside of Red Dead Redemption 2 into this part of the world that's not actually intended to be visited.
Beautiful film.
And trying to keep a little bit of that alive was part of the aesthetic, and maybe we could call that jank as well.
And it's one of the reasons that I love speedrunning so much as a pursuit, because that really is, I guess, specifically engaging with glitches and trying to break the game in order to actually play it even better.
Yes, yeah. No, it does kill you though as a designer. The fastest speed runs for baby steps. There's a cave there's an underwater cave.
Yep.
And there's a little tiny hole in the bottom of that cave that allows you to get out of the game world and fall through into infinity. And from there you can go anywhere in the game. So that's like once you get there, now you desperately as a designer you want to just patch that out and fix it.
Yep.
But you can't, because as soon as somebody has a world record, that's the culture of the game, right? That becomes a fact about it. It would be like going up to Mount Everest and being like, this ridge here is a little easy to we'll just get the chisel and kind of like, let's make that a little bit more difficult. No, it's a fact. Yeah. And so you try to embrace those facts, I think.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think that's interesting, that conversation between yourself as developer and between players is acknowledging the different ways people will approach your game and stuff, and yeah. Yeah, we've got a real popular one here. So you say you made Getting Over It in parts to feel seen. So did you feel seen? Was that what was that seeing like, and how did this change your relationship to failure?
I think, I think I did feel. I'm just going to hesitate to say this, right? But what I really wanted was to somehow defeat this experience that indie game developers have a lot, which is you announce your game and you get like emails that are addressing the team, you know, or maybe they're saying switch port when, a thing that is very rude to say to a single developer, but perfectly okay to say to a team of 50, right? Yeah. So there's a presumption amongst a lot of the players that it's a giant faceless team, and that it's that everybody's following a design doc that has been developed collaboratively between a large number of people, and it's somehow the average of everybody's opinion or something like that. And I do feel like a lot of the people who play Getting Over It understand that that's a single person, but not everybody. Those kind of like understandings of like games being made in an industrial process as though they were in a factory, that dies hard. It's really persistent. But having said that, I mean, the people who got it, I felt like they got me, or maybe I got them. And there's a moment that tests that toward the end of Getting Over It, where right at the end of the game, once you've kind of almost beaten the whole thing, there is a snake, and the snake is a slide that you can slide from the end of the game right back to the beginning of the game. And the game kind of dares you to do it, right? It's like if you're really like me, you're not going to want to finish the game. You're just going to want to fail. So I put this little slide in to kind of take you back and to reset you. And I did hear from a lot of people who were there. They're like, yeah, you're right. I actually do want to fall back down. I don't want this to end. And I think in those moments, I feel like something in me is seen, because that's often how I feel. So it's not my whole self in the way that some autobiographical games like Consume Me, Jenny Jassia and A.P. Thompson's game really is like a kind of a full exploration of Jenny at a particular time. But it is something that was important to me. It was on my mind at the time, right? I was trying to get that across, and I do feel like that was seen. Yeah.
I guess in a way, though, you duped your player base. There were snakes, but no ladders.
That's true.
How did the Baby Steps team arrive at the style, or the particular audio style of the soundtrack? And what was the primary driver for that choice?
So that's really, I mean, I would have to defer to Maxi to explain the creative process behind that. But we gave her a very difficult brief, which is when you're making a game like this, it's very unclear what the emotional tone is going to be at any given time. It's like, here is a game where It could be a slapstick moment where you fell over. You could be speed running through. All these people do a kind of thing they call like a donkey step, which is like skipping through really fast. You could be playing it in a very zen sort of like going for a hike kind of way. You might be struggling. You might be finding it incredibly easy, and all of these things. Open world games make this really tough because you can do anything in any order, and you can go anywhere, and you can be succeeding or failing to an extent, and that's tough to orchestrate because you don't want music that will kind of step on the emotional experience that the player is having. And I think what's there in the final product is Max's attempt to solve that very difficult emotional problem by weaving the soundtrack into the natural sounds of the space. So yeah, but as for the particulars, yeah, that's a question for Maxi, I guess.
I like this one just because of the use of the word bawdy. That's not one I hear every day, but I love it. I'm curious what motivated you and Max to put the bawdy parts of the game, like the furries and breast milk hills.
Yeah, the bawdiness.
I love a bit of bawdiness.
Right. So yeah, no. What did encourage us to do that? So where did it start? We got the character pretty early on. We wanted somebody who would be walking in this weird way. The walking got a little more natural over time, but he still walks like somebody who doesn't know how to walk, right? Or has just learned how to walk. And the idea was to have somebody who's like not dressed for it, is not like an avid hiker or anything like that, in a way that it sort of explains why he's not able to do the things video game characters can frequently do. Nathan Drake is like a parkour genius who can climb a wall with his bare hands, never needs a rope, and all of that stuff. And
shoots everyone.
And he wasn't going to be like that. So, but then we have this unprepared guy. I think Frank Lance came in and he was like, "This game's called Baby Steps," and we're like, "Okay, that really works because you're taking little steps." And it's kind of that's a big idea. And so then we had the idea that he's kind of like a man baby, and that we wanted sort of like in a magic realism way for the world to be suggesting his kind of like unpreparedness and his lack of coping and lack of kind of masculine sufficiency all the time, like his being a baby. So yeah, the world. I think the idea that the world would have breast milk in it came along pretty early as a result of that. I think not for bawdiness at that point, but just for a kind of a reiteration of the kind of humiliation of the character and his failure to reach adulthood. But then, yeah, once you have that, now you're starting to get a little bit of sexuality is starting to show. And then you follow those threads, I think, is the answer. And sometimes games have a way of leading you to how they're supposed to be. So it was just some kind of like one step at a time.
Process of discovery.
Exactly. Yeah. It was a funny moment though when I was talking to the guy. We used Jason Booths, who used to be a employee at Harmonix back in the day. He makes the most popular terrain shading system for Unity engine, which is what we're using. And I was like, yeah, I was trying to get the milk to look correct, and I was talking to him. It's like, yeah, I've got this problem with making my terrain milk look right. And it's like, oh, terrain milk, yeah, sure, I can help you with that.
You commented on Discover the World by Sylvie about a notion of mechanics versus effects in design. Will those thoughts influence your design ethos in the future?
Yes. Okay. So let me see if I can recap this idea. So, and this relates to some of the stuff that we've been talking about actually. Sylvie, I really recommend people check out Sylvie's games. Most of them are free. Most of them are made very quickly, and she's just this incredibly gifted maker of games that tend to be embracing of jank like mine, and they're difficult, but just to me very, very beautiful in certain kinds of ways. But one of the nice things that Sylvie does is that she always writes up design notes whenever she launches a game, and so you get a little bit of insight into her process. And she was expressing frustration with her most recent game, was Discover the World. So, which was paraphrasing. I didn't want to do game design, but somehow I wound up doing it, and I'm sorry. Like, I didn't like. And I was like trying to understand this, reading her design notes and trying to understand what it was that she was talking about. And it was that kind of thing that I'm talking about, where some games are found and some games are made. It's normal as you get better at your craft to have more power to make things as you want them to be and to do less kind of finding of stuff. And one of the really beautiful things, and one of the things that I relate to in Sylvie's work, is a lot of it is kind of found. So in this particular game, for example, the biggest jump you can do in the game, you press the up arrow on your keyboard to jump, or you can press the W, like WASD keys, depending on what play with your left or right hand, right?
Yep.
The biggest jump is if you press W and up at the same time. And it's actually in the game, it's told that's the super jump, but it's clearly that's just something that she did by accident, because she implemented both sets of controls, and she discovered you can jump super high this way. It's just finding something in your own work, right? So this is kind of anti-design in a way, because the game design thing to do is to be like, oops, I made it that you can jump twice as high if you're playing with both hands. Nobody will do that, right? Nobody can discover this, so I'll just get rid of that. I'll turn that off. That would be the game design thing to do. Sylvie always takes those moments to be like, no, that's the game, right? And I'm going to build everything around this discovery that I've made around my game. And so I felt a commonality there when I was writing to Sylvie in her comments on this. That was what I was trying to kind of get at. But I do think that's already in my work, going back to QWOP. I don't think I do it as well as Sylvie does, right? But even Sylvie is struggling to be able to stick to that approach, to the kind of trying to look for things and to find them and to bring them out rather than to make them exactly as they've been envisaged. In other words, to do game design. And it's hard. It's hard to resist, especially as you get better at making stuff. So I do hope to do more of that in the future. We'll see whether vanity and craft get the better of me and I start just doing game design. I hope not.
How do other forms of art or screen entertainment inform your game making, especially given your musical background?
Well, I haven't been doing music for a little while because we gave that over to Maxi to own completely. But I guess I have been rediscovering film. This is something that through doing a lot of cutscenes for Baby Steps. I was also watching a lot of film. But how do I relate to it? I think the answer to this is probably terrible and nerdy, which is that so many of my formative experiences in my life were playing video games. That I think probably, even though I do go to art galleries and I go to movies and I read books or whatever, a lot of the time I'm kind of relating them to video games that I've played. That's such an embarrassing thing to admit when I'm being recorded, but it is just definitely how
I think a lot of people will identify with that statement.
Sometimes people are, like asking me a question like, what year did you do such and such? I'm like, well, which games was I playing back then? Has it been like that, I think, ever since I was a little kid? So, it's sort of more in the reverse direction.
How do you feel about the world record speed run for getting over it being under a minute?
Yeah, it's something like 45 seconds now. It's really, really shocking. Because first time that I beat getting over it without using debug keys was about 7 hours. And most of the people who were coming into my chat room and talking to me had taken between, let's say, 5 and 12 hours. Really had taken a long time. And I really thought probably would get speed runs that were maybe 10, 20 minutes. And that happened almost immediately. And then this is not one which has like glitches. People are not using glitches to beat. They're just doing it fast. It's really incredible. Got down to 5 minutes super fast. And I thought probably 2 minutes was the limit then. And then got to 2 minutes, got to 1 minute. 45 seconds. And it's just that I think the thing is that once you are doing it in a minute, you can do it a million times, right? And there's a lot of people who play Getting Over It as their kind of like knitting game, as their comfort game now. Because they hop in, they're not going to suffer any frustration. They're not going to get annoyed because it's over in a minute, right? And if it's not over in a minute, they're restarting because they're practicing, right? So it's very, very opposite the intended experience. But I've loved watching that. If nothing else, when the game first came out, I had so many people who were angry, saying it was random. It's like, oh, I'm climbing this and I just randomly fell off. It's like full of random number generation and it's really unfair. And it's like, why'd you make such janky controls? I was like, I actually sweated the controls super hard. I wanted to make sure there was very little randomness. The fact that you can beat it in 45 seconds means there's not a ton of randomness in there, right?
No, and look, I think the thing that sometimes people forget when they talk about that is that those people have dedicated that much more time than anyone else to playing it. I mean, talking to speedrunners like someone like Vichy Suki, who's one of Australia's best Hollow Knight speedrunners. I mean, to prepare for a new run or something like that, I mean, she'll put in 300-400 hours.
Yes.
Literally just getting every tech, every strat, every jump down to a fine art to the point where it's literally just muscle memory.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think there's a real joy and dedication that the community has in getting it down, even shaving off like those 0.1 of a second.
It's interesting. They still have at the NYU Game Center. They have a thing called Playtest Thursday. So all the students bring their in-progress games, and a lot of indie developers also kind of come by for free playtesting. Yep. And the thing that you see time and time again is that there's a game. It's barely even a thing. It's somebody's student project or it's a prototype, whatever it is, barely exists, probably won't be worked on ever again. And there'll be somebody who comes and sits down and is like, right, I'm going to be the best at the world at this game, right? There's something in people where they just decide in their heart, this is going to be the one. I don't care if it's broken and it's unfinished, and I'm gonna break this over my knee. Yeah. I don't know where that comes from, but it does seem almost universal.
It's something I think innate in us. I mean that speaks back to in early video games days, like the high score board. Like, I mean, at local, like it'd be the local pizza parlor or something like that. But it would become my all-consuming thing for a school holiday is that I am getting to the top of this leaderboarding,
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. And I mean, maybe that speaks to the innate nature of competition and what that means for us as a species.
Yeah. No, I mean, I used to spend hours as a small kid. I could only get so many 20-cent coins from my parents. So I would just stand behind the big kid who was good at the game and watch them play. I have this kind of key memory. Port Fairy Fish and Chip Store had a cabinet of 720 degrees, which is still one of my favorite all-time arcade games. It is really punishing.
Yep.
But the guy who was there was able to play it for like 2 hours on one credit, and I just was fascinated by that guy. He was just spending probably days of his summer just glued to this thing. I thought he was the coolest person in the world.
I love it. But we are getting towards the end of the talk, but we've still got time for a couple more questions. So what are some of your favorite frustrating games?
Oh, that's a great question. I was just looking at a giant. So there are things called rage games. Some people are now calling them Foddian games, which it's very flattering to me. I was looking at a tier list of those. Somebody had put maybe 200 games in a grid. And I was going through. I've actually played so many of these, and I do love them. The ones that I like the most, let's see, Jump King is incredible. I really loved Only Up until the guy took it down. There's some that are happening in Minecraft and Roblox as well. There's some that are happening in Trackmania. So one of the things that I've really loved over the last few years. If you're not familiar with Trackmania, it's kind of slightly abstract car racing game which has no collisions but is oriented toward player developed tracks and having a lot of people in there trying to race against each other on the player developed tracks. And there's this trend that has happened of Trackmania tracks that are very, very hard to even complete one lap of. And there was this one that came out called Bennett Foddy Stole My Checkpoints, which takes, like multiple hours to beat. And you have to start again. It's like a tower, and you're trying to get your car up to the top of the tower through progressively more and more difficult challenges. But that gave way to this thing called Deep Dip, which is a collaboratively developed thing that is probably it's like a dozen developers put their skills together to make a series of these things and stack them up on top of each other. And the whole community, they had like a community prize pot for whoever could beat it first. And the whole community was trying to kind of run this thing at the same time to find the first person who could drive from the bottom of this tower to the top without falling. And then there's Deep Dip 2, which is even bigger. I think the prize pot for that was tens of thousands of dollars. And I've just loved watching that. I think that and then I drop in and play. I'm like the kids who are like watching the streams and then kind of like getting that experience and then kind of going in for a little dabble. It's way too hard for me, as I'm not actually good at games. But that it was sort of meaningful that had kind of happened. Yeah.
So I mean, talking about difficulty, I guess like one of the core sources for difficulty, I guess, is looking at like ROM hacking in the Kaizo community. So have you had much to do with that?
I haven't, as it's always far too difficult for me. But I have a huge respect for people who are doing that, and it's getting more and more ambitious. Actually, I think Maddie Thorson's work is really interesting right now. That's a place where it's kind of very pure, right? Because the characters and the setting and everything is really kind of is abstracted away, and you only care about modifications to the level design from the original ROMs. And there's something and there's no chance of commercializing it because you're modifying existing things. The closest I got to that is I made a game with AP Thompson called Multiball, which I know you've shown here a few times, which is technically a ROM hack of something like 312 multiplayer games where you play just 1 point in each of those games and it switches to a different game every time you score. That's as close as I've gotten, but I really would love to get back into that space.
If you ever get the chance to have a go of Multiball, it is the ultimate party game. It is super fun, and even for the people who don't play video games, it's great. I think we've got time for probably one more question, so let me have a quick look. I like this. So, what was your experience going from making 2D games to 3D for baby steps? And I guess what kind of skills and evolutions to your skill set did you have to make to make that happen?
It's a really good question. So it's something that we did not anticipate because I think my work at all previously had been 2D, at least in gameplay. Getting over it is a 2D game with 3D graphics. But what is really key about that is that the camera never rotates. And the second that you make a game where the camera rotates, everything changes. And when people are getting into making 3D games, they do not appreciate how big of a change that is. When the camera rotates, it's a perspective camera, now I can see everything in the whole game, right? And no matter how far away it is. And I have to contend with what that means for how people play. And suddenly there's all of these kind of ways of seeing and ways of thinking about levels and spaces that are part of it that are not there in a 2D game. Architecture becomes a thing. Entryways become a thing, and route finding, and there's all of this stuff that depends on having a 3D perspective that suddenly becomes part of the creative palette. And so, like when we were making baby steps, just being able to think, well, we want it to be that you can go anywhere that you can see. Now you can see the whole thing. You have to think about, are we going to have borders on the world? Are they going to be like invisible walls? Are we going to be having actual walls? We're going to build it in a valley. Everything starts to be up for grabs in that sort of space. And I would love to keep working with the 3D camera. it's so much bigger of a space, and it's so much more difficult, and it's so silly for 3 people to try to make a game like that. But it's just very empowering as well, and I think that it gives you all of these kind of creative tools that just flow from how reality is, right? Like things get smaller when they're further away from you, and you're not really sure what that thing off in the fog is. And now if I feel a certain way about, I think I see something over there, but if I go over there, I'm not sure if I can get back. All of that stuff doesn't exist in 2D games, and I'd be really sad to give up that the richness of that palette. So yeah, it's probably going to be more 3D.
Great. Well, I'm sure you all enjoyed tonight's conversation as much as I have. Can I please get you to put your hands together for tonight's guest, Bennett Foddy?
That's